There is a stunning split in the Gupkar Alliance. This alliance stands divided on talks with Pakistan. National Conference patron Farooq Abdullah distanced himself from Mehbooba Mufti's comment where she batted for dialogue with Pakistan and emphasized on making them a stakeholder. Farooq Abdullah said this is Mehbooba Mufti's agenda. He has nothing to do with it. He went on to say he doesn't want to talk about talks with Pakistan. His interest is only a dialogue with the Prime Minister. PDP Chief Mehbooba Mufti, after Gupkar meeting on Tuesday, had said that the Narendra Modi government must initiate dialogue or must have dialogue with Pakistan.
सुधारने इस खिते में अमन लाना है, न सिर्फ जम्मू कश्मीर या हमारे मुल्क के अंदर बल्कि पूरे खिते में, तो इसके बगैर कोई चारा नहीं है। क्लियर कर दिया, नो कॉम्प्रोमाइज ऑन दैट। और डायलॉग की बात, हमसे डायलॉग कर रहे हैं। हम कहते हैं कि ये दोहा जाके तालिबान से डायलॉग कर रहे हैं, आपने सुना होगा हमारी गवर्नमेंट। तो जम्मू कश्मीर में डायलॉग करे और सबके साथ करे और पाकिस्तान के साथ भी करे रेजोल्यूशन के लिए।
फारूक साहब, महबूबा मुफ्ती ने कहा कि पाकिस्तान से बात होनी चाहिए, धारा 317। आप ही का गठबंधन तो है।
देखिए, जहाँ तक इंडिविजुअल का सवाल है, वो एक पार्टी की लीडर हैं, वो पार्टी की बात करती हैं, उसमें मैं कुछ नहीं कह सकता, क्योंकि उनका एजेंडा अपना है, मेरा एजेंडा अपना है, दोनों पार्टीज हैं और कोई ऐसी बात नहीं है।
पाकिस्तान की बात लाना बीच में इस मौके पर क्या ठीक है? आपको लगता है ऐसे मौके पाकिस्तान की बात नहीं लानी चाहिए?
मैं पाकिस्तान वगैरह की बात नहीं करना चाहता। मुझे अपने वतन से बात करनी है, अपने वतन के प्राइम मिनिस्टर से बात करनी है।
India Today's Paulami Saha now joins me for more on the story. Paulami, bring us details. We've heard what Mehbooba Mufti said, what Farooq Abdullah wants. Does this appear to be some kind of a fissure in the Gupkar Alliance, especially when it comes to dialogue with Pakistan or making Pakistan a stakeholder in these peace talks? Give me a moment, I'll try and reestablish that link with Paulami Saha in just a moment. But Farooq Abdullah is very clear. He's here for a dialogue with the Prime Minister to state his point. And his point was extremely, it was amplified when he said, "Chahiye to humko asman, lekin dekhte hain baat aage kaise बढ़ती है." Mehbooba Mufti, very clear. They want Article 370 to be restored first. That's a part of the Gupkar declaration. I also want to cut across to India Today's National Affairs editor Rahul Srivastav, joining me for more on this big story. Rahul, now the battle lines, if I may, are very clearly drawn. But do we look at it as a new dawn? Both Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir and Delhi wanting to move forward? Or will this end up being a dialogue of the deaf?
Gaurav, it's a very positive sign that after what happened on 5th of August 2019 and the kind of climate which had built, the resumption of a dialogue between the stakeholders in Jammu and Kashmir and the central government is an extremely positive sign. It has not happened with great amount of ease. It has happened after a prolonged effort by the centre to restore a semblance of normalcy in the troubled area, also to initiate certain economic and other administrative measures in the troubled region, also a long duration of ceasefire on the border, a certain amount of international pressure, and a certain resumption, a quasi-resumption of talks with Pakistan. In that scenario, the central government has opened its door that let's start talking. Although the stakes are very high, Gaurav, because I have spoken to Mr. Tarigami, who is the convener of PAGD, and he's extremely clear that the key demand remains the first resolution passed by the Gupkar Alliance, which is that the pre-5th August 2019 situation should be restored, while the government will like to talk beyond that. And that is why to come together to a point where there could be talk about a statehood resumption is very difficult. But what can be on the cards, what sources are saying, is that a slow ingress. That means tentative steps being taken slowly for a resumption, one of a democratic progress in terms of elections in the state. Is it with UP? Perhaps the government will like to have more time, sometime with elections in Gujarat in 2022. That's the timeline that the government would be looking. But before that, there has to be a lot of confidence building measures between the stakeholders and the centre.
Let me for a moment, Rahul, focus on the top story, and this is an India Today exclusive, and Rahul will talk about this in greater detail, where Farooq Abdullah has very clearly distanced himself from Mehbooba Mufti's agenda. And I want to bring in Pooja Shali for more on this. Pooja, Farooq Abdullah says this must be her agenda. He wants to talk to his Prime Minister. Bring us details.
Gaurav, this is also classic Dr. Farooq Abdullah. He has been given extremely important statements as per the opportunity that he's been given. But what has happened now is this is one alliance. The National Conference chief and the PDP leader are speaking very different agendas right now. Of course, the positive alignment by Farooq Abdullah is also reflecting further on that. Because remember, showing Gupkar not united on talks. They went in together. They said they're going to participate. But Pakistan becoming now the split wide open proves that the two leading figures disagree on Pakistan. Clearly, Farooq Abdullah, Mehbooba Mufti, the senior most visible netas, but with different narratives right now. They may provide Modi the leverage in talks, because if Pakistan becomes the main point, who will the Modi government want to then prefer for further talks? The cracks could be exploited politically as well. But first of all, this is importantly Kashmir-based netas was one group of Gupkar Alliance, the name that was given, at least for today's meeting when they should have looked completely united. The split wide open. Over to you, Gaurav.
The split is wide open, and Pooja, we've seen the split even in the past, and I want to bring in Rahul Srivastav. Anand Patel also joins us on this story. Sajjad Lone was already not on the same page with some of these leaders when it came to elections in Jammu and Kashmir. So are they on the same page, or accept that one issue of restoration of Article 370, where the government, at least government sources and the BJP have made it very clear there's no going back on that aspect? Anand Patel, what about the Congress party? So you have Tara Chand, you have Ghulam Nabi Azad in this meeting, but how do they move forward? What's the Congress's line on this all-important meeting?
Well, Gaurav, Congress party is represented by Ghulam Nabi Azad, who happens to be a former Chief Minister of J&K, and Ghulam Ahmad Mir. He is the JK PCC chief, the state unit in charge for the Congress party, and also Tara Chand, as you mentioned, he's the former deputy chief minister. Now, these three leaders were present in the all-important meeting which took place on Tuesday under the chairmanship of Ms. Sonia Gandhi. It was also attended by Dr. Manmohan Singh, and in that meeting, the Congress party welcomed this talks initiation by the Prime Minister with the J&K political parties. The political dialogue the Congress party feels is very important, a step towards undoing what was done on the August 5th, 2019, when the democratic rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir were taken back. The Congress party feels that though there is no specific agenda for this meeting, but it thinks that any political dialogue is towards the restoration of the constitutional rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The Congress party has mentioned very clearly that it looks forward to restoration of full statehood of J&K before any elections are held by the centre, and any timeline is being spelled out by the centre on this issue. Gaurav.
Stay with me. The Dogra front in Jammu, they've staged a massive protest against the PDP chief Mehbooba Mufti after she insisted on dialogue with Pakistan. Now, Dogra activists demand that the former chief minister of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir should actually be sent to jail for this. Activists say Pakistan continues to sponsor terrorism in India, and yet some Gupkar Alliance leaders back Pakistan. Now, after a meeting of the Gupkar Alliance on the 22nd of June, Mehbooba Mufti had said if the centre can go to Doha and have secret parleys with the Taliban, then why can't there be a dialogue with Pakistan on Kashmir?
Ahead
ahead of the important all-party meeting on Jammu and Kashmir, the activists of Dogra Front are staging protest in Jammu. Right now you can see behind me that the activists of Dogra Front are raising slogans against Mehbooba Mufti and Farooq Abdullah. And you can see that protesters are raising slogans against Pakistan and Mehbooba Mufti. They want that legal action should be taken against Mehbooba Mufti. They want Mehbooba Mufti to be jailed. We will speak to Abhishek Gupta, who is a youth activist from Dogra Front. Abhishek, Mehbooba Mufti has demanded that talks should be, reinitiated with Pakistan. What do you have to say on that?
Mehbooba Mufti on first basis is no one to even express a request like this. After 370, everything got sorted. And after coming out from a meeting of PAGD, she's saying that Pakistan should be made a stakeholder in the Kashmir issue. She has lost all her plot. Her entire party is on the verge of getting finished and ended. And statements like this are only way to revive her finished and dead politics.
You can clearly see that there is outrage over Mehbooba Mufti's demand for resumption of talks with Pakistan. The protesters here are saying that Mehbooba Mufti is trying to embolden the terrorists, and that is why there have been terror incidents in Srinagar in last 24 hours. With video journalist Neeraj Kumar, this is Sunil Bhatt reporting from Jammu for India Today.
So Prime Minister Narendra Modi in about 50 minutes from now is to chair this all-important meeting on Jammu and Kashmir. Union Home Minister Amit Shah, Union Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office, Dr Jitendra Singh, also a Member of Parliament from Jammu and Kashmir, from Udhampur, and Jammu and Kashmir's Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha. They met the Prime Minister at his residence. Now, along with the Prime Minister, these leaders are also likely to be a part of that meeting. National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, he was in Dushanbe for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization NSA's meet. Now, that meeting was actually brought forward so that he could quickly rush back to India and then be a part of this meeting. The government has invited senior leaders both from Jammu and from Kashmir, elected representatives of the erstwhile assembly of the former state of Jammu and Kashmir, to be a part of this meeting. Now, Kashmir leaders, those who are a part of the Gupkar Alliance, they want restoration of Article 370. They're also demanding immediate elections and restoration of statehood. This is the first political exercise after the Narendra Modi government brought in the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act 2019 on the 5th of August 2019.
It could be the first thaw in the bitter standoff between the centre and the political parties in the valley.
अनुच्छेद 370 के सभी खंड लागू नहीं होंगे सिवाय खंड 1 के नामक तदनुसार पढ़ा जाएगा.
For the first time after the dramatic steps taken in 2019, the warring Kashmir parties will sit across the table at a meeting called by the Prime Minister. The decision by 4 former chief ministers, Farooq, Mehbooba, Omar and Ghulam Nabi Azad, to hold a dialogue with the Prime Minister has given a glimmer of hope on Jammu and Kashmir's future. The Prime Minister's all-party meeting is likely to focus on the delimitation exercise in Jammu and Kashmir. But it will also give the Gupkar Alliance an opportunity to put forth its demands.
प्राइम मिनिस्टर से मिलने जा रहे हैं, जो मुल्क के प्राइम मिनिस्टर हैं, नेचुरली पूरे खुले मन से जा रहे हैं.
हमें उम्मीद है कि हम अपने जो मौक़िफ़ है उसको वहाँ पे वज़ीर आज़म साहब और होम मिनिस्टर साहब के सामने रखें.
The Jammu-based leadership too expects to gain, although there is a feeling that the Prime Minister's meeting has a more valley-focused agenda.
बिल्कुल हम कहते हैं कि ये अदर देन पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज इस तरह के ग्रुप जो ऑलरेडी गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया जिनको किसी न मुख्तलिफ रूप में कंसल्ट करती रही है और वोट लेती रही है, और उनकी बड़ी बात भारतीय जनता पार्टी वोट लेने के लिए तो करती थी, तो उनको सुना जाना चाहिए था जिस तरह से राउंड टेबल कॉन्फ्रेंस कांग्रेस पार्टी करती आई है.
एक मन से, एक भाव से, समभाव से आ रहे हैं और सभी इस बैठक का हिस्सा बनेंगे, अपना अपना पक्ष रखेंगे.
The all-party huddle is the first major political outreach by Prime Minister Modi after the scrapping of Article 370 and splitting of the state into 2 union territories.
वज़ीर-ए-आज़म साहब, अगर कोई रास्ता है कि लोगों की उमंगों को, जो लोगों को ठेस लगी है 5 अगस्त 2019 को, अगर उसको किसी तरीके से उनके उन जज्बात और एहसासात को थोड़ा सा मलहम हो जाए, वो देखा जाए, वो हमारी स्टेटहुड जो सबसे पुरानी रियासत थी इस मुल्क में, उसे बहाल किया जाए, हमारे डेमोक्रेटिक इंस्टीट्यूशंस को इमीडिएटली डेमोक्रेसी वहाँ बहाल की जाए, इलेक्शंस हो.
What's clear is that the meeting is aimed at resuming the electoral process in Jammu and Kashmir after the completion of the delimitation exercise. It's also an effort to remove the trust deficit between the valley and New Delhi. But the road to peace and stability is full of challenges. While the level of violence has reduced in Kashmir, incidents of terror continue almost on a daily basis in the valley, with policemen and citizens coming under attack. Still, from Srinagar to Jammu to Delhi, all eyes will be on the Prime Minister's meeting. Can it be the icebreaker that Jammu and Kashmir desperately needs? That's the big question. Bureau Report, India Today.
So will this be a new dawn in Centre's relationship with Naya Jammu and Kashmir? Now, India Today's Pooja Shali explains what the Gupkar Alliance wants. So what leaders in Kashmir want, what leaders in Jammu want, and what the Centre's stand is likely to be.
It is Mission Kashmir 2.0, but importantly, there are 2 different stands being taken. One by the government looking at elections now as a Naya Kashmir, and one the old leadership and their stand. So what is the difference? First, the Gupkar Alliance, which is the Kashmir-based netas, they want to restore Article 370, but we all know clearly that is not on the agenda. Government has already said they're not going to go back on that historic decision. Again, the Gupkar Alliance has demanded a full statehood. The government has said they are looking at it in the future. Home Minister Amit Shah has said that there is a possibility that the statehood will return to Jammu and Kashmir. Gupkar Alliance's demand, release the separatist netas who are still behind bars. The government stand is that for now, this is not part of the agenda. So what all will these Kashmiri netas going to say today? What will the Jammu-based leaders say at the meeting to the Prime Minister, to the Home Minister, to the NSA? And what will the government respond?
Rahul Srivastav, is there merit in Jammu, or at least some in Jammu, feeling miffed that the same leaders from Kashmir who've been calling the centre names, who've been criticizing this landmark decision, they are being called for dialogue and Jammu is being ignored? Is there merit in that criticism?
Gaurav, Jammu and Kashmir is a very complex matrix of equations. And in that, if the government has created a new platform for talks, the government knows that it has a certain advantage right now, because till now, it has been either accept what centre does or bust, nothing else. And that is why, if you see Farooq Abdullah, who is a savvy politician, is striking a middle path. He knows that any level of stridence as far as the demand of the PAGD is concerned will mean that the doors for any future talks will shut down. And that is why he's towing a middle line. Now, beyond that, if you see the group of people who have been called, it's a very complex group with different political interests. So if there are protests or demands for talks with the militants or the strident groups or Pakistan by people like Mehbooba Mufti, Jammu is also a sense of aspiration. And that is why it's a political balancing act, Gaurav, going on, in which every stakeholder is trying to assert their position as far as this group inside is concerned, that when you strike a deal with the centre or are negotiating with the centre, do not forget us. So it's a kind of a Me Too in which all the leaders are standing up and saying. What is interesting, Gaurav, in this meeting is that with the leaders going in are saying statehood first.
Okay, these are first images coming in of BJP leader, the BJP president of Jammu and Kashmir, Ravindra Raina. He's leaving the JK house for that meeting with the Prime Minister. I quickly want to cut across to Aishwarya, my colleague Aishwarya Paliwal live for more. Aishwarya, bring us details of what conversations have been like. Aishwarya, can you hear me? Okay, we'll just take a moment and try and re-establish that link. Go on, Aishwarya. You were giving us details about deliberations in the BJP camp ahead of this meeting. And clearly, Jammu and Kashmir, the leadership, they both have very different agendas that they take to the Prime Minister today. Okay, I'll take a moment and re-establish that link with Aishwarya Paliwal. I also want to bring in India Today's Sunilji Bhatt. Sunilji, as far as Jammu is concerned, as Rahul Srivastava was saying, it's an aspirational Jammu that wants an equal place on the high table. Are they getting that equal place on the high table? Because why should Jammu feel miffed? There is Nirmal Singh, Kavinder Gupta, Tara Chand, Ravinder Raina, Professor Bhim Singh. They are all representing, area south of Banihal.
Absolutely, Gaurav. There are representatives of J&K BJP in that all-party meeting. But what many socio-political groups here in Jammu are saying that they are going to toe the centre's line. They cannot violate the centre's line, and they can't speak for Jammu as vociferously as the other socio-political groups can say. And that is why they were saying that Jammu-based groups like Ekjut Jammu, Dogra Swabhiman Sangathan, Dogra Front should have been given representation in this important meeting where the political future of Jammu and Kashmir is going to be discussed. And Gaurav, Jammu is facing discrimination for last many decades. That's what the socio-political groups here are feeling, and they want that since Modi government is at the helm of affairs and Modi government has abrogated Articles 370 and 35A, and they have pinned high hopes in this government. But if the government doesn't include them in the dialogue process, doesn't include them in the consultation process, then they feel that they are being left out. And what many groups have alleged since yesterday, that BJP is behaving like Congress by only catering to the Kashmir-centric.
No, but is there merit in that criticism? Because government sources have made it very clear. The current interaction is with political leaders, not with other groups just as yet. All of them have either been former chief ministers, deputy chief ministers, MLAs, leading members of political parties. So is that criticism, at least at this stage, misplaced? Rahul Srivastava.
Gaurav, there is criticism of this kind. There is a sense of aspiration. But the government wanted, the central government wanted to start a dialogue because largely the government is interested in restoring the democratic electoral process in the region. That's why a delimitation exercise is already underway, with the election commission already very actively involved in the exercise. And in that process, the government wants to have very specific kind of leaders who can give their sense of view, and also in terms of future participative character as far as holding of elections or resumption of democratic exercise is concerned. When it comes to a regional representation in terms of groups and aspirations of various domiciles and demographies, then the government sources are saying there could well be a series of meetings to decide the future of Jammu and Kashmir.
Yes.
But right now, Gaurav, if you see, the government a few months ago merged the J&K cadre with the UT cadre.
Yes.
If the government was in a mood for statehood, then the centre wouldn't have taken that kind of a measure, because to merge it and demerge it very soon doesn't make sense. That's why one can say is that the government today is looking for restoration of democratic exercise. Gaurav, what does India represent? India represents democratic transitions. What does the government talk about always? That what's big about Jammu and Kashmir, that despite any amount of trouble in the region, elections have been participated by the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
Okay.
So the first big step for normalcy or return to normalcy for J&K will be election. And this meeting could well be the first big giant leap towards that exercise.
You know, the straws in the wind, Rahul Srivastava, and the points that you raise are so critical for people who are saying that this is the first step towards restoration of statehood. But what will be the face and nature of that state when restored is extremely interesting. Remember, it's a border state. It's a border area. Remember, there's an external element. There's a war with Pakistan's state terror. And that is where the police reporting to the center, to the Ministry of Home Affairs, plays a very critical role. Farooq Abdullah, let's... Okay, so we'll also be listening. Let's listen in.
टाइम शुरू हो रहा है, बेहतर है कि हम अंदर एजेंडा सुने और सारे स्टेक होल्डर्स अंदर क्या बोलेंगे. कांग्रेस अपना मौकूफ बोलेगा. कांग्रेस तो कांग्रेस वाली लैंग्वेज बोलेगा, देश हित वाली लैंग्वेज बोलेगा, जम्मू कश्मीर के लोगों के हित की लैंग्वेज बोलेगा. वो हम अंदर बात करेंगे एजेंडे के मुताबिक.
तो यहाँ पे देखिए गुलाम अहमद मीर, अंजना आप मुझे देख रही हैं, गुलाम अहमद
Congress party leader along with Tara Chand, and we'll also be listening to Ghulam Nabi Azad in just a moment. So Congress leaders also now on their way to meet the Prime Minister. I want to bring in Aishwarya Paliwal. Aishwarya, Jammu Kashmir House has a very different look as of now. There are leaders from the Gupkar Alliance, Congress and the BJP all leaving almost simultaneously.
Well, all definitely leaving simultaneously, Gaurav, and we did see a flurry of activity here. Just a few minutes back, we saw the BJP leaders leaving, and from what we are understanding, in just a couple of minutes, Mehbooba Mufti too will be leaving through these very doors, all of them heading straight to the Prime Minister's residence. So definitely a flurry of activity, and from what we have understood, the leaders who were inside, they have come out and they have strategized on what they want to speak, because they do understand that this could be possibly one of the first chances which they have had with the Prime Minister, and they don't know whether they will get this chance when all of them together will be sitting in one room with the Prime Minister and they will all have their talking points. So a strategy too has been devised here inside the JNK house. All the leaders wanting to make the most of this meeting, which according to many is a historic meeting. There is an attempt to bridge the gap between the JNK leaders, what the people of JNK feel and what the centre wants. In just a couple of minutes, Gaurav, from these very gates, we will see Mehbooba Mufti also coming out, and then she too will head to the Prime Minister's house. Gaurav.
Okay. I'll come to you in just a moment. Now, what we are also being told is that Ravindra Raina, Kavindra Gupta and Nirmal Singh, they've already reached the Prime Minister's residence. That's the BJP leadership. What we are also being told is that the three Congress leaders were all at Ghulam Nabi Azad's residence. They had their interaction. Now they are on the way once again to 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. And in a moment from now, as we were just being told, Mehbooba Mufti will also be leaving, and Farooq Abdullah and Omar Abdullah. I once again want to bring in Rahul Srivastav. Rahul, is this being seen as a new dawn when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir and the road ahead? Or will this just end up being perhaps Jammu's putting its points forward, Kashmir putting its point forward, and no middle ground there?
Yes, Gaurav, it does seem like a battle of two very strident positions. We saw that recently, Gaurav, in the talks dialogue between the government and the farmers, what strident stands can do. Eventually, it can lead to a breakdown. And that is why the government, if you notice, Gaurav, has remained silent. It has sent out invitation to all people who have had participation as far as the JNK electoral process is concerned. Second, if you see somebody like Farooq Abdullah, who has seen many storms and dialogues and negotiations with the centre, is taking a middle path. And that's a very, very heartening aspect as far as these talks are concerned. That means that when they go inside, the PAGD as a united group is going to talk to Farooq Abdullah, though people will be taking different positions, may cite their own views, say Mehbooba Mufti talk about Pakistan. But PAGD right now is taking a line which is not confrontational or absolutely contradictory to what the centre may be wanting. And that is why one says that there is definitely some sense of hope that it may not lead to a breakdown today, that instead of a breakdown, the government and the groups may talk about meeting again tomorrow or some other day, which means an engagement which can be better towards restoration of a democratic exercise. Though different groups have different demands, but that demand will come later, Gaurav. That's what top government sources are telling me, that right now the idea is to send out a signal that J&K is well towards a route towards democracy. One important point I want to tell you, Gaurav, that you were talking about what kind of statehood. You see, a statehood like Delhi, for example, with J&K being a UT, is not possible because Delhi government does not have right to land. And that is why a Pondicherry-like example could well be the greater vision that the government and this group can talk about. But that's going to happen after an electoral process, not prior to that.
But will that be acceptable to the leadership or the existing leadership, Rahul, of Jammu and Kashmir? Many would argue that they've had the police under their control. A statehood where police is not reporting to the chief minister, will there be a lot of objection to it? And how will the Prime Minister be able to convince them, or the government at the centre be able to convince them? There is a very strong case, because this is a situation. There we see images of Mehbooba Mufti, former Chief Minister of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, now on her way to 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. Rahul, it's a border area which has seen Pakistan state-sponsored terror. So for better coordination with the intelligence agencies and the centre, the police could well continue to remain in this current form. Rahul.
Yes, Gaurav, it's a very, very long road that the two groups are going to embark upon today. It's a very, very long process. Lots of pros and cons have to be weighed in. You see, the world has changed as far as India's geopolitical position in this region is concerned, vis-a-vis what happened on 5th of August 2019. You've got China breathing down our necks. And in that scenario, overtures with Pakistan will be read differently. And that is why the government will not like to enter into what is called a quick fix. And that is why if somebody thinks that they can get inside this meeting and come out with results, say government going back on what it did on Article 370, is an absolute no. That decision from the centre, top sources are saying, is absolutely non-negotiable. And statehood is not on the agenda right now. And beyond that, the government will like to convey to the people who are in the meeting that there have been certain positives which have been gained as far as the almost 2 years of this exercise of Article 370 not being there in the region. So it's a dialogue. And Gaurav, in a democracy, the critical view, one of the top members of the team of the Prime Minister in the back room said that the most positive element of this is that everybody has agreed to talk. There are many Cassandras, there are many doubters.
Oh, yes.
But the fact that everybody has come to Delhi and is ready to meet the Prime Minister is a huge, huge step compared to the acrimony which existed in the months after the abrogation of Article 35A.
You know, perhaps that's also because the writing on the wall is there for all to see. But this indeed is a big opportunity for Jammu, for Kashmir, and for the centre. I once again want to bring in my colleague Pooja Shali. Pooja keeps a hawk eye on all that's happening in Jammu and in Kashmir. And Pooja, this will be a mega opportunity for everyone to actually harness.
That's correct. This is definitely a big opportunity for Jammu and Kashmir and for the government and netas there in the valley, despite the differences between these sections. So what is this big opportunity? On top will be, remember, there's going to be a new template for a peaceful Jammu and Kashmir politics, with a hope that there are going to be faces which are going to be new. But importantly, there is going to be democracy again back with elections, unfinished assimilation of Jammu and Kashmir. So there are issues with regard to Jammu not getting enough seats. There's going to be a new structure for J&K governance as well. This will be important. If the faces are old, what sort of new strategy is the Modi government planning? And while this is going to be partially discussed in today's meeting as well as per sources, potential is end to legacy the circle of gloom, because there's been violence, there's been bloodshed for over 30 years now. Modi government promised that peace will return, and abrogation of Article 370 was one of the first steps to start. And brand new political foundations for J&K. So while there is cynicism of why the old leadership and the Muftis and Abdullahs have been invited, the fact is they have been invited, the talks are taking place, and Modi government definitely mulling with a new governance in Jammu and Kashmir.
Pooja, for the moment, many thanks.